we will start. And the recording is switched on, so I think we can start. So what I'd like to do is to just remind everybody that for Zoom meetings, if you could stay on mute, and if you wish to speak, if you could raise your hand, and hopefully I or one of the team will notice and then come off mute and speak when invited to do so. And we'll try and ask people to speak in the order in which they raise their hands. May not always be perfect, but we'll try. So what I'd like to do, if possible, is just to go around the room, and so come on, if everyone could come off mute and be prepared to introduce themselves, because I think there are one or two new people. And so I think if you could, when I call your name out, if you could just say who you are and your affiliation. So I'll start with, in the order which you appear on my screen, which you won't know, so watch out when I call your name. So I'll start with Claire Lewis. Claire.
Hi, let me just put my video on. Hi, I'm Claire Lewis. I work for Vistion. I'm one of the business representatives from Success Essex.
Thanks very much, Claire. Graham, and you are on mute at the moment.
Graham Peters, Chairman of Team East Sussex, and therefore one of the directors of SELEP. And in real life, I'm a small-scale property developer.
Thank you, Graham. David Shepherd.
Good morning, I'm David Shepherd, and I'm standing in for Anna Christie. Anna and I have worked together. I was chairman of the Sussex Chamber of Commerce for 3 years. I'm vice chair to Graham on Team East Sussex, and also the chair of the steering committee for Business East Sussex, which is the growth hub for East Sussex. In the past, I've been managing director of large defence companies, and currently I'm an owner of a high-tech SME. In the aerospace, defence and security fields.
David, thank you very much. You're very welcome. Alistair Gale.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much. My name is Alistair Gale. I'm Director of Corporate Affairs and Strategy at the Port of London Authority, and I'm joining you for a presentation about the Port of London.
Great. You're very welcome, Alistair. Paul Winter.
Good morning, everybody. Paul Winter, Non-Executive Chairman of the Wire Belt Company, as I think you can see in the background.
Yep.
I'm business rep on KMEP and attending as Jeff Miles, excuse me, Jeff Miles alternate.
Thank you. You're very welcome, Paul. Councillor Graham Butland.
Thank you, Graham Butland, leader of Braintree District Council, and I represent Essex Planning Authorities on SELEP.
Thank you, Graham. Joe James.
Joe James, Chief Executive of the Kent and Victory Chamber of Commerce, board business rep for Kent, I forget who I was then, and Vice Chair of KMEP.
Thank you, Joe. Councillor Rodney Chambers. Rodney, you with us? Can you hear?
I can now. Joan froze. Councillor Rodney Chambers, representing Medway Council.
Thank you, Rodney. Clive Soper.
Morning, Clive Soper, representing the Federation of Small Businesses and Team East Sussex. I'm also the one of the business champions for SELEP, and in my real life, I work for myself, doing project development on civil engineering projects.
Thank you, Clive. Adam Bryan.
Thanks, Chris. Adam Bryan, I'm Chief Executive of the LEP.
Thank you, Adam. Perry Gladding.
Hi there, I'm Perry Gladding. I'm Chair of Opportunity South Essex, which is one of the federated boards of the SELEP. I'm also Vice Chair of the Thames Estuary Growth Board. Up till 2017, I was Managing Director and Chief Operating Officer of the Port of Tilbury for nearly 18 years, and I'm currently Vice Chair of the Port of Dover.
Thank you, Perry. Carol Ford.
Hello, I'm Carol Ford. I'm Business Advisor and Sector Specialist in Fresh Foods and Horticulture. I'm here as the KMEP Board Representative.
Thank you, Carol. Angela O'Donoghue.
Hi everybody, I'm Angela O'Donoghue. I'm Principal of South Essex College and I'm here representing further education and skills.
Thank you, Angela. Councillor Keith Glazier.
As I say, Councillor Keith Glazier, leader of East Sussex County Council and member of Team East Sussex.
Thank you, Keith. Penny Shimon.
Good morning. I'm Penny Shimon, Chief Executive of Sussex Community Development Association, a charity. I'm a member of Team East Sussex, and I'm here representing the SELEP Social Enterprise Working Group.
Thank you, Penny. Councillor Ron Woodley.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Councillor Ron Woodley, Deputy Leader, Southend-on-Sea Borough Council.
Thank you, Ron. Sarah Dance.
Hello, I'm Sarah Dance. I'm Deputy Chair of SELEP, and I'm co-chair of the South East Creative Economy Network, which is a working group of the LEP, and co-chair of the Thames Estuary Protection Corridor and chair of Creative Estuary. In my real life, I love your words, Graham. I'm a creative producer and arts consultant.
Thank you, Sarah. Liz Gibney.
I'm here as a business representative of KMEP. I'm also the chair of the Coastal Communities Group for the LEP. And in my real life, I am a partner at the Evans Partnership of Charter Architects in County.
Thank you, Liz. Just you're a little bit faint, so when you speak again, if you could just get close to your mic, then we'll. I think, could everyone hear Liz? No.
Somebody's hoovering in the background.
Ah, okay. Well, hopefully, when you speak next, they won't be. Carol Barron.
Good morning, everyone. Carol Barron, University of Kent, representing Professor Karen Cox, who's our Vice Chancellor and President. We represent 9 universities within the SELEP region.
Thank you very much, Carol. Councillor Mark Coxall.
Hello, Councillor Mark Coxall. I am representing Thurrock Council today and Cabinet Member for Regeneration.
Thank you, Mark. Adine Sadler.
Hi, everybody. I'm Aideen Sadler. I'm representing Opportunity South Essex, the Federated Board, and day to day, I'm City Manager for City Fibre.
Thank you very much, Aideen. Matthew Arnold.
Morning, everyone. Matthew Arnold. I'm a KMEP board member, and in the day job, I'm Commercial Director for Stagecoach in Kent and East Sussex.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Legsley Wagland.
Very much indeed. I'm the Cabinet Member at Essex County Council for Economic Renewal, Infrastructure and Planning. I'm here for Councillor Bentley, who can't be with us, and sends his apologies and best wishes for a great meeting. And my background is that of a planning and valuation lawyer, working on major civil projects, civil engineering projects, business projects, and other such matters rather within your remit, but fortunately not within the area that we're dealing with.
Thank you, Councillor Wagland. Trevor Bartlett.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Nice to meet you all. I'm Trevor Bartlett, leader of Dover District Council.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bartlett. Have I forgotten anybody? Anyone's name I haven't called out?
Mine, Chairman. Roger
Oh, yes, Roger, I didn't see you there. Excuse me, Councillor Goff, last but not least.
Thank you. Roger Goff, leader, Kent County Council.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that completes the roundup. So thank you very much for that. As I mentioned, the meeting, as is customary these days, is being recorded. I've mentioned the raise hand function when you want to speak. Also, if you could not use the chat function, if you want to say things, it's most important you say them for the record, because obviously the chat won't be recorded. Should we move to votes, I will simply ask those voting in favour to indicate that they're doing so by raising the hand function when called upon to vote. And make sure that once you have voted, or once you have spoken and you've concluded, that you make sure that your hand is lowered again, otherwise you will be called again to speak when you may not wish to do so. So we'll now move on to the meeting itself. Could I ask for well, first of all, any declarations of interest for any of the business that is being discussed this morning? Yes, Joe, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, item 8, the update on the Growth Hub.
Thank you, and we'll note that. And Graham, Graham Peters, I see your hand is up.
Yes, absolutely. It should be noted that I'm the chairman of the New Haven Enterprise Zone under item 10.
Thank you, Graham.
No personal or financial interest, obviously.
No.
But
No. Okay, thank you. In that case, also, just as I always do at this time, just to ask those directors to make sure that their declarations of interest, which are recorded on the Register of Interests and on the SELEP website, are kept up to date. So any changes in your personal circumstances, if you could make sure that those are notified through to the Secretariat. Thank you for that. So moving on to the next point, are there any comments on the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 19th of March? And if not, are you happy for me to sign those as an accurate record of the meeting? Thank you. There are a couple of matters arising, which I will ask Adam to cover in due course, but I in particular wanted to record my thanks, and I hope the thanks of this board, for the service of Councillor Rob Gledhill, who is stepping down. Rob was a great supporter of SELEP and made a very valuable contribution, and we will be in due course voting on his successor, Councillor Mark Codsall, in due course. But I just want to make sure that we recorded, if you agree, our collective thanks for the service of Rob on this board. Everyone happy with that? Thank you. Good, thank you. In that case, Adam, are there any other matters arising that you would like to take the board through?
There are, thank you very much, Chris. So just 4 other things I just wanted to put on the board's radar. Firstly, to confirm that since the last board meeting, we have been in receipt of our APR rating, so the annual performance review from government. This year, it was a very simple binary met or not met on the areas of governance, strategic impact, and funding delivery. On all 3 of those measures, we were met, which is obviously the best possible score. So along with many of our colleague LEPs, you know, it was a good outcome, but I just wanted to formally update board members on that, and with thanks to you for your support along the way as well. Secondly, we received a notification of our internal audit outcome from that is organised for us by the accountable body. The outcome of that was that we were given good assurance with no recommendations for action. So that is the highest rating that can be given. So we were really pleased to get that as well, which was a good, again, good recognition of the way that we operate now, which was very well received by us too. Thirdly, on a different tack, just to flag that board members might be aware of the Skills for Jobs white paper. So this is around the skills landscape generally, and the plans of government to improve connections between employers and providers. The DfE previously invited expressions of interest to develop local skills improvement plans, which had a deadline of the 25th of May. Interestingly, LEPs were not eligible to put in for that, albeit, so there will be 6 to 8 trailblazer local skills improvement plans across the country, and other business-led groups have been invited to put in. Suffice it to say that we've offered support to local organisations interested in that, and that offer absolutely stands. So any expressions of interest relevant to this area, we're very happy to put our expertise into, because board members will recognise that the work that this LEP has done on skills, particularly through the Skills Advisory Panel, has been very effective. So we will continue to do what we can to positively support that agenda, and wait to see how the way forward on skills really correlates with the way forward with the LEP review as well. But just wanted to make board members aware of that, and send our best wishes to colleagues who are involved in the development of LSIPs that have got a footprint locally. The last thing I was going to mention, Chris, was just to reiterate a message that went out to board members a number of days ago now. A few board members, and we're not clear on who's received and who hasn't received, but there have been a number of statements made around the delivery of a range of projects in a given area of the LEP, and it isn't necessarily the case that the board members just in that one area have received. I think other board members have received a few statements directly, and these relate to delivery of projects through Sea Change Sussex. We're handling these statements in accordance with our complaints procedure, as we're obliged to do. which means that we'll accordingly investigate the claims. And where appropriate, we'll report back to the board on any remedial action that needs to be taken, anything that needs to be done, but where appropriate. And of course, that that investigation is absolutely in the context of the contracting relationship that we have directly with East Sussex County Council. So anything further on that will be in touch in due course. And that's it in terms of matters arising from me, Chris.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam. If with your permission, I'll move on to the next item, which is about the appointment of directors and diversity champion. What I'd like to do first is deal with the, oh, Sarah, your hand is up. You wanted to make a observation?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I mean, I don't know how you're going to go through this, but I did want to talk about the diversity champion, and I think there's been a little bit of confusion, and I don't think that's the papers don't quite reflect the situation. So I was asked by you, Chris, to attend the Catalyst South Diversity Working Group meeting, which I did.
Yes.
And I don't think I was assuming that that would mean I would become the diversity champion. And so what I would like to propose is that I pull together a diversity working group, and from that group a champion is selected. And so that if the board agrees to this idea, then please could board members willing to be part of this really important working group, let me know if you agree. And I'd just like to emphasize that I think this is a really, really important and significant strand of SELEP's work. And the group will be really highly focused on real and tangible delivery. So I just wanted to say that because I think the papers aren't quite right.
So just to clarify, Sarah, what you're proposing is that you will set up a working group, and out of that working group, that working group will then propose to the board a diversity champion, and there will be an open process and transparent process around that selection, and then the board will then be asked to vote on that, presumably at the next meeting. Is that what you're proposing?
That's what I'm proposing, yeah.
Okay. Are people, well, first of all, is the board content with that as a slight change to what was in the papers? And secondly, if you could just raise your hands to indicate so I can see. It looks like that's fairly unanimous. Thank you. And then if those people, I know that there have been a number of people who have expressed an interest in assisting in this process. So if you could let Sarah know that of your interest, and I'm sure she will be delighted to accept all help as appropriate, and that working group will come back. I suggest it comes back not only with a recommendation as to who the diversity champion should be in an open and transparent manner, but also it would also be helpful if you could suggest some terms of reference as to how that diversity champion should operate in the context of SELEP, and possibly also in relation to Catalyst South. I see that Angela and Perry still have hands up. Do you wish to make observations? Okay, I shall ask Angela and then Perry.
Can I just ask a question, Sarah, because I don't quite know how it's going to work, because it's fine having a diversity champion on this board, but if you want to have some action, then really you need a group which you can co-opt people who come from diverse backgrounds, because there aren't many of us on this call, who can feed into that group and give us information about what we need to be doing to widen diversity. So I'm just wondering, is that the plan? Is that the idea, that there'll be a working group where you invite people from different diverse backgrounds, whatever they might be, to actually become a part of that and inform the SELEP about what it needs to do?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Angela. And I was going to ask the Secretariat whether I mean, I presume we're allowed to do that. And I was very much hoping that we would be allowed to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that absolutely should be the way forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Angela. Perry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to check that this working group includes local authority representatives, or whether it is just private sector, because as we can see from the appointment of directors, which you're just about to discuss, that doesn't help our diversity drive with the directors coming on. And I appreciate the local authority has more challenges perhaps than the private sector, but I'm hoping that this group includes local authorities as well.
Perry, I think that's an extremely important point because I would note that we have a board of 20 plus 5 co-opteds, and out of that 20, quite rightly, local authorities have the ability to nominate 6 people from our upper tiers, and I would note that all of the nominations have so far been of one sex, which makes the challenge for the gender targets that are set for us by central government so much more difficult to achieve for the remaining 14. If the local authorities are always going to nominate male nominees. So I would just note that, and I think that the point that you've raised, Perry, is an extremely important one, and I would like local authorities to to assist Sarah in the diversity group, because then they can perhaps help us meet our various targets. At the moment, the government has just set targets around gender, but I expect that in due course, and quite rightly, they'll be setting targets in other characteristics as well. So that's so I've got Liz and then Carol. So Liz.
Hopefully you can hear me now. Can you hear me better?
Yep, we can hear. I think we can hear you slightly better.
Just to reiterate on your last point, that the diversity needs to go way beyond whether you're male or female.
Of course.
Very much more open-minded about who we are in the first instance as engaging with, and then we really need to try very hard for representatives of a much more diverse demographic in a number of areas. I put myself forward to work with Sarah, and I'd be delighted to do that.
Yes, Liz, you're absolutely right. Diversity is more than just one particular characteristic, and so I think that's something that I know that Sarah feels equally strongly as everyone has expressed who's spoken so far, that's an important issue. So thank you for raising that, Carol.
It's just to say, I think if this group could meet fairly quickly, because in light of item 8. If we're going to go in favour of Sarah becoming an interim chair, then what does that mean for the champion role? And would we need to look at whether or not that needed to be delegated to somebody else because the chair role is so busy? And so it's not saying that I wasn't supporting Sarah, because, before Sarah spoke, I was ready to support her into that role. But I think with item 8, if Sarah becomes that interim chair, then what does that mean for the diversity?
So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, Carol, but I think what we're going to say in relation to item 8, we should really deal with it at that time. But since you've raised it, what I would say is that at the moment, because of the various uncertainties around the LEP review, I'm going to propose that we actually defer the decision around succession until October, the October board, because by that time we'll be much clearer. And it's so just to hopefully allay your concerns, that will be the proposal. Clearly, this board will have its own views, but that will be my proposal, that we don't have to make a decision on the chair right now. We have nine months to get it right, and if we delay it until October, we still have 6 months, which should be ample time to get an orderly succession in place. But we'll come back to that in due course. Sarah, you wanted to. Sorry, Carol, have you?
No, I was just going to say, because the diversity area is such an important one.
I agree.
Get it up and running as quickly as we can.
Yes. No, your point is still valid, even if we do decide to defer the decision around succession for the chair role. Sarah, you wanted to make a point.
I'm just wondering whether I should withdraw from the discussion. Sorry, I just want to make sure it's due process.
I think we're almost done. Adam, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I'm keen just to just cover the other points in this item.
No, we're going to.
And also, I had a recommendation as to how we run through the decisions as well, just to tidy it up a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we've agreed on the diversity champion point. I think so. There's going to be a working group which Sarah will chair. If she is through this,
I will pull together. Doesn't mean I'll chair it. Sorry. Yeah, I'll pull the first go. Yeah.
That's okay. And then so people who want to serve on this, and I can see there's a lot of interest. It's a very important piece of work. Please, if you could contact Sarah and she'll pull that together. And then there'll be recommendations around this at the next board in October. Good. So we'll move back then in that case to the board appointments. Adam.
Yeah, so thank you, Chris. So two things on this. So to run through the board appointments and just to tidy up the decisions on this item. So firstly, obviously following a change of leader at Essex County Council, we're asking the board to resolve to appoint Councillor Kevin Bentley as a permanent director of South East SELEP Limited, following David Finch not standing for re-election. And also following a change in cabinet responsibilities at Thurrock Council, that as we've covered with the thanks to Councillor Gledhill already, we're asking the board to resolve to appoint Councillor Mark Coxall as a permanent director of the LEP, recognising that that Councillor Gledhill has indeed moved away. So that's the kind of the opening two decisions of this item. I was going to suggest, Chris, so if board members are able to review the decisions from 2.1 through to 2.6, I was going to suggest that we simply removed the decision 2.3 and that we reworded 2.4 to say agree to form a diversity working group coordinated by the SELEP deputy chair.
Yep. That's everyone happy with that, with Adam's suggestions? So what you're agreeing to is you're agreeing to the appointment of Councillor Mark Cogsall and Councillor Kevin Bentley as I'm not sure they're permanent members, but they're certainly they're the nominees of those two upper tier councils, being respectively Thurrock and Essex County Council.
As upper tier authorities, they're permanent members.
So they are. So the upper tier authorities are permanent members. Okay, and the directors are permanent as well.
Yeah, until such time as
they're not,
the term is served. But yeah, for these purposes, it's permanent.
Okay.
Yeah.
So everyone happy with that? Yep. And also the working group that's being coordinated by Sarah on diversity. Everyone happy with that? Good. Okay, that's great.
Sorry, Chris. Could we just seek a clear vote on all of those items? Apologies.
Okay. So item one is then the appointment of Councillor Mark Cogsall. If you could vote in favour. Great. Thank you very much. So that's carried. And then the next one is the appointment of Councillor Kevin Bentley as the nominee of Essex County Council. If you could vote on that. Those in favour. Thank you. And then as far as the diversity issue is concerned, it will be what we've agreed to do, I think, is we've agreed to form a working group which will be coordinated by Sarah, and that will report back with the recommendation as around a champion and around the terms of reference and how they will work together for the next board in October. Could I have your votes in favour of that, please?
Yep, that's there. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, does that complete? We then have to note, obviously, that Councillor David Finch was no longer eligible to be a director of SELEP because he stood down. He didn't stand in the recent election, and therefore he has his records have been altered as accordingly. And also we should note Councillor Rob Gledhill's resignation from the board. Good. Okay, let's move on then to item 4, which is the River Thames. Adam, over to you.
Thank you very much. So it gives me great pleasure this morning to introduce Alistair Gale again from the Port of London Authority. Just to give a bit of strategic context for this, we are very conscious that we've had over the course of history lots of conversations at the LEP about all the good stuff that we've invested in across Essex, Kent and East Sussex. And I think, you know, to that part of the country, how the Thames works and the future use of it, its potential and its role as an economic powerhouse is not a topic that we've covered an awful lot. And given the importance of it, and given the importance of our relationship with the Thames Estuary Growth Board, we felt that a few sessions, a few information sessions on the Thames would be in order to really make sure that we're better placed to make any future decisions that relate to its support. So with that in mind, we invited Alistair from the Port of London Authority to give us his perspective on things, and hopefully it'll be a worthwhile and helpful session for all of us. So I will hand over to Alistair with my thanks to you, Alistair, for joining us this morning.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. No, really happy to join you this morning and spend a little bit of time talking about the Port of London. There are four key things that I'd like to share with you through this presentation. The first one is around the Port of London's scale and importance. The fact that the port was fantastically resilient through the pandemic, that the port's a catalyst for investment, development and growth, and that, not necessarily most important, but certainly important, it's going to be central to the coming transformation that we're going to see around the net zero economy. So one brief point of explanation before I go any further. At the Port of London Authority, if we could have the next slide, please. We're the harbour and pilotage authority for 95 miles of tidal river. We don't have any direct involvement in cargo handling. That's done, if we could have the next slide, at some 70 independent terminals and sites along the river, like DP World and the Port of Tilbury. But this map gives you a sense of the span of operational terminals from east to west, running from Canvey Island all the way up into West London. So while we don't handle cargo, we do coordinate port operations, and we're really well placed to talk like this about the port overall. So let me just first cover what the numbers say. The Port of London returned to UK's #1 port last year. That was for the first time since 1999. There's been a gap between ourselves and Grimsby and Immingham on the Humber, which has been the UK's largest port since 1999. It's been closing progressively, but last year, finally, the switch happened and we became the UK's #1 again. And during that year, we handled approximately 47 million tonnes of cargo. But 47 million tonnes, that's just numbers. So we have the next slide. We just get a feel for what's behind the numbers. And this is by no means a complete illustration of what comes through the port. It's food, it's it's oranges, it's meat, it's crisps, it can be wine, it's fuel in the forecourts running across London and the southeast, building materials, and yes, British exports. Engines, you see engines there on the production line at Ford at Dagenham, which are shipped from Dagenham out to the continent, plugged into cars there. Some of the cars are then sold on the continent. Some of them come back for sale in the UK. Move on to the next slide. In terms of jobs and economic impact, our research shows that the headline figures in terms of jobs is 48,000 full-time equivalent direct and multiplier jobs. And a massive range from people working in the production lines at factories which are intimately linked to river supplies. So you see somebody on the production line there at Tate and Lyle. All of the raw cane sugar that they process comes in by sea. You see somebody driving a crane at DP World London Gateway. PLA pilots, our pilots guide the ships in and out of the Thames. Ford again, and our port control centre there. So huge number of jobs and generating £4.5 billion of economic value added. So this really is a major economic powerhouse at the heart of your region. I mean, to a certain extent, is almost the jam in the sandwich of the South East Local Enterprise Partnership. So looking at the port as a resilient operation, port operations were uninterrupted throughout the pandemic, which is a phenomenal and I have to say an essential achievement. It doesn't mean we weren't affected by the pandemic. What we achieved was the result of a lot of hard work to be COVID secure. And like most companies, for us, it got very tight in early January with people either off ill or isolating, but through a combination of flexibility and determination, port operations continued. And that's really important because just remember, this is the way that we get the food on the supermarket shelves, the fuel in the forecourts, and critically through that period, medicines in the pharmacies and in the hospitals. that achievement really drew on many hundreds of people undertaking key worker roles. And the critical thing to bear in mind here, it's not just the ships. So the ships are the way that the goods get into the port, but once they hit the ships, it's people on the tugs, it's the pilots, port workers, the lorry drivers, the train drivers, and really mustn't forget the seafarers, who are somewhat of an unheralded army through the pandemic. Many of them had extended tours on their vessels and couldn't even disembark in port. So we at the PLA worked very closely with the local mission to seafarers to make sure that they were well looked after when they came into London. We provided them with essentials like toiletries, prepaid SIM cards so that they had the opportunity to call home, and a few sweet treats as well, just to take the edge off things a little bit. So if we could have the next slide, I think possibly the most stunning thing through the process of this pandemic, that in the midst of it, a new port was delivered. Tilbury 2, a £200 million investment by Forth Ports, began handling P&O freight ferries in May last year. And that's a major investment on the Thames, transformative for P&O's operations and really important for the efficiency of links between the Thames and the continent. And that leads on to the next theme, which is a catalyst for investment, development and growth. So as a port, we're continually evolving. Some trades grow, others wane, but the riverside sites are always attractive for new developments. London Gateway, for example, and now familiar as a modern container handling terminal, is built on the site of a former oil refinery. So let's just take a run through what other developments we've seen on the river. Tilbury, I mentioned, has been a centre of continuing development throughout my time at the PLA. I've been working at the PLA for some 15 years now, initially expanding to the north and then the latest development at Tilbury 2, but countless other developments through the period. If we have the next slide, please. London Gateway opened in November 2013. That's capable of handling the world's largest ships. This vessel that you can see in the picture is HMM Algeciras, which called last summer, which at that time was the world's largest ship, and now has a few sister ships on the high seas, 400 meters long. And I think if you ever drive on the continent and you think about how long it takes you to drive just a single kilometre, half of that roughly is the length of this ship. It's massive. And the opening of London Gateway put the Thames back on the world's superhighway for container trades, because we couldn't handle ships like this until that point. Other developments, the Cobble freight handling operation at Purfleet, they've got new ships in service. They've redeveloped their terminal berthing facilities to accommodate those ships. Building material companies too, redeveloping their terminals, and also they're ordering new ships. So I think the key thing for me is that in spite of all that, we've got great confidence that there's more to come. The economic impact research that we did suggests that there's a further £1 billion of investment to come. And that research was done before the Thames Freeport was designated. And the Freeport is set to make the river an even more compelling proposition for future development. And just another word on the Freeport. What sets the Thames bid apart, or what set it apart for me, was the involvement of Ford, where you have a commercial organisation clearly committed to delivering the technology which is going to drive some of the changes we're going to see in society, allied to the cargo handling, development, expertise and potential of DP World and the Tilbury port operations. So if we step back from the deep sea port, it's important to remember that the Thames, in effect, is almost three rivers in one. So if we have the next slide, please. The Thames is also home to the UK's busiest inland waterway for both passengers and freight. Some 4 million tonnes of material are moved by river every year, saving lorry movements and crucially carbon. And these inland waterways operations are the focus for continual development. Any site that comes up, we will have multiple operators want to start operations on the Thames. Have the next slide, please. You might have seen last week coverage of a new SEVA river freight trial, which is taking NHS supplies from Dartford up to Tower Bridge twice a day. This is taking lorries off congested roads, and then once the freight gets to Butler's Wharf just at Tower Bridge, it's put into bikes for the last couple of miles trip to Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital. And we expect to see more of that, a lot more of that, as logistics companies start to embrace the potential of the river. And the next slide, please. In normal years, we'd see some 10 million passenger trips on the Thames. But this photo shows a 2017 week-long trial running up from Gravesend to central London with Thames Clippers. Hugely successful. That remains a long-term aspiration to extend the commuting network out as far as Gravesend and Tilbury. I have to say, though, the immediate priority is recovery post-pandemic, because passenger boat operations have been probably the most dramatically impacted of river activities. So we just look at prospects for the future. The immediate future, with investment planned, a free port designated, the prospects are really strong. But what comes next between now and 2050 is key. This is a major focus for us at the PLA. We're reviewing and updating the river development framework, the Thames Vision. We see the transition to net zero carbon, which will affect the way that all of us live our lives. Some of us were having a quick chat about this before the formal meeting started. The most immediate impact, we have the next slide for us, just in terms of cargo, but this actually indicates, I think, the change that we're all going to live through. This sets out the projected volumes of liquid bulk cargoes, which is principally petroleum at the moment, between now and 2050. And what you can see is very rapid decline in those traditional fossil fuels, and then a replacement of them by the feedstocks that are going to come in their place. Ammonia as a feedstock for hydrogen, for example, and synthetic jet fuel. So a very radical change. It's clear that hydrogen is going to be important for the future, and there are studies going on around that. But there'll be more change besides ships using new and different fuels. We've commissioned a study into that so that we understand their energy needs when they come onto the river. And next slide, please. Ship and port control technology is going to change as well. In the medium term, we could see semi or even totally autonomous ships. But in order for that to happen, you need the international regulations to keep up as well. There's other change that could flow through in terms of cities reshaping, the impact of the pandemic, and so on. But whatever happens, the Port of London, the operations on the river are going to be central to this energy and technology and consumer transformation. We're working very closely with the Growth Board on that energy transition, and indeed the use of the river for light freight. It wouldn't be appropriate not to have a brief mention of trading relationships with the EU. Thames terminals are well placed for the new trading relationship with Europe. On the Thames, we focus on unaccompanied trailers, and clearly there's a longer passage between Thames terminals and ports on the continent. That actually works very well with the new customs regime, and we've seen growth in services going to and from the Thames and the continent, basically starting from Q3 last year. As I mentioned, we're in the phase of redeveloping the Thames Vision. There's a document about that. I'll share a link to that subsequent to this meeting. If that's okay, I'll check in with Adam on that. So just to draw things to a conclusion, I've shared a lot of information in a very short space of time. And I think the main things to remember are the scale of this port operation, the resilience of it, the fact it's a catalyst, and the fact that it's central to the coming transformation that we're about to live through. So just a reflection, really, what does that mean for the LEP and its partners? The Port of London, the operations on the Thames are a centre for investment, growth and employment. Collectively, we train people, we invest in skills, we develop them. But all of that doesn't mean we don't need investment and support. Private capital sustains investment in the terminals, in the ships and in the workforce. Protecting and reinforcing that is essential with supporting investment. Next slide, please, particularly around infrastructure to make sure that goods can get to and from the port efficiently. Yes, we have the Lower Thames crossing coming, which is fantastic. But even with that, the connections to and from the port have to be in place for it to have the biggest impact. We need the power network to be able to respond to a completely different way of generation. And I could talk for ages about power generation. I won't go down that track. Next slide, please, just to wrap up. We need support in preparing young people to join this workforce. So that's three key things: infrastructure, power connections, and training young people. I hope that was interesting. I'm really happy to take any questions. And as you might have picked up, I could have talked for a good 20 minutes or so longer. But anyway, so we'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Alistair, thank you very much. I mean, clearly the Port of London is one of the great ports of the world, a critical driver of our economy locally and nationally, and indeed even internationally. I had a question really about the pandemic and what effects the pandemic has had, and do you see, to the extent it has had an effect, do you see recovery coming through now? What's been the effect of the pandemic on?
What's been really fascinating for us is that if you look at it through the time that we've been affected, immediately there was an impact. Before the pandemic hit, we were, I suppose you use the phrase, flying. The port was hitting some of its highest throughputs of recent decades. Definitely a brake was applied when the initial lockdown came in, but actually relatively quickly, virtually all of the cargo types started to recover. The only one that didn't recover and still remains resolutely low, and it's not surprising, is aviation fuel. Nobody's flying, nobody's using the fuel, and so there's just no demand to bring it in. But otherwise, I think also you'd say fuel in general, the amount that people are driving, there's less commuting and so on, that is slightly down. But overall, I think we've been very surprised at the robustness of demand, which we've been able to serve.
Alistair, thank you very much. Are there any other questions that people have? Yes, Joe.
It was a really interesting presentation. Thank you, Alistair. I just going back on your final words, which was supporting preparing young people for this workforce. So I just wanted to ask, do you feel that you're already tied into the right support network and with the relevant organisations to help you there? And if not, what further can we do?
That's a really good question. So just to give you a feel for what we do at the PLA in terms of training and bringing young people in, we have a very active apprenticeship programme, and we've also been extremely active with Kickstarters over the last couple of months. We have strong links into one of our mechanical engineering apprentices is training, I want to say in Basildon. I'm not 100% or sure I've got that right. I think I have though. I think the point is broader though. All of the operators, I know that Port of Tilbury has a very active training program, as does London Gateway. So it's less about what we need as the PLA. It's more about what the port as a whole needs, the whole collective. And I think drawing people in and giving, even if it's just getting the port into the minds of young people when they're at school, so that they consider it as something that they want to go into once they're looking at further training, because the opportunities are there now and they're going to be manifestly greater as time goes on, particularly as development through the Freeport comes through.
Thank you. I've got, I think, two more questions. Thanks, Joe. Two more questions, then we'll move on and thank Alistair. So Councillor Cogswell and then Carol Barron. Mark.
Yeah. Obviously, the majority of that is in our borough of the Inwood. But me and Alistair talked many years over this, but it's very good to see it here. And I really want it's that sandwich is the really important comment that Alistair said. We're between the Thames is between this whole SELEP, and I think SELEP here could play an important part in the decarbonisation agenda inside that. And if we can't do it on the Thames ship into London and change the way our ship movements and our logistics roll, then I think this board and how the port to help the Port of London and if we can move forward, we could be a principal reason for SELEP's existence about how and change modal changes and shift here. And I think this board is an important place for that. And it's not just about promoting one airport over another port or a competition. It's about how we can change over the next 50 years and help that change and help central government. And if we can't do it on the Thames, I don't think we could do it anywhere in the country.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Just to come back on that, I think one of the unique attributes of the Thames and of the Port of London is that you have deep sea cargo operations right on the doorstep of the biggest consumer market in the UK. So the opportunity, and one that people they're sort of moving towards and looking to realise, is the potential bring in the goods into the deep sea port and then look at the movement up into London. Seeing it in teeny part through the SEVA trial, but I do think there's greater potential, and there's other projects like the City Markets Consolidation Scheme at Barking and Dagenham, which just provides almost a potential stepping off point between the deep sea port into the city. I think the prospects for transformative change are really there.
And if I can come back on that, it's just one other thing is what's not been mentioned here. It's like HS2. HS2 is a critical, even though it's not in this region, it's a critical delivery to change how we can get rail freight, which is the most important thing of both seaports across and then to Dover. How we can get extra freight moving to the north, which delivers the government's levelling up agenda to the north. But we can't do that without everything going into London first and then out. And if we can actually talk about getting extra lines, and HS2 is an important way of freeing up space on that. It's not just about passenger movement, it's about freight movement, which will help this region more than anything else. I mean, with Dover, the Port of London, and Harwich and Felixstowe. So we've got big ports agenda here, and I think we've got an opportunity to help the government sell HS2 to give them logistics things, and we just need to get links into that, the old existing lines for our freight movements.
Totally,
and that helps decarbonisation again with the less truck movements.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm glad that I included the rail freight picture earlier on. That's, I mean, sometimes we worry that the Port of London is unseen and unheralded. I think the rail movements are even less seen and even less heralded, but fantastically important. If you had the stuff that's moved by rail now moved by road, you would definitely notice the impact if that happened. So yeah, more capacity, definitely welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I've got two other people who have also snuck in there. I think we're going to have to call an end to it after those. So I've got Carol, Angela, and then Sarah. So Carol.
Yeah, thank you, Alistair. That was a fascinating presentation. Thank you very much. I'm just following up Joe's point about the skills. I think I'm right in saying SELEP has the largest group of universities outside of London within SELEP. I think that's right.
Yeah.
And so just because some of the universities aren't located very close to the Port of London, we come together as a group, and you also have FE on the board, which is fantastic. So I think, it'd be a real opportunity to tap into what we can do around the skills agenda, but also for us, particularly around the research side, because there's a lot of work going on across the whole of the universities in this area. But I think the one area that I'm finding all the groups that I attend, the boards, the business groups, the biggest challenge at the moment is recruitment. So just because you're going to train people up, that doesn't mean to say that you'll be able to recruit the workforce that you need going forward. So it's something to keep in mind to get hold of those young people, as you said, and get them interested in the opportunities.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's a really important point, actually, and it may be something that we could discuss offline a little bit. In particular, it could be something that we work into the new Thames vision, because I'm really keen in that we pick up on and find a way to deliver on key themes around opportunity, equity, and access. It's really important that we make it possible for people to engage and get to make the most of these jobs. And so yeah, I think putting the building blocks in place so that they've got the skills and the awareness to do so is really important. So yeah, love to catch up on that at some point.
Thanks, Carol. So two more, Angela and then Sarah. Angela.
Hi, Alistair. I'm Angela O'Donoghue from South Essex College, and you do your apprenticeships with us.
There you go.
We offer marine engineering, which we deliver at our Basildon campus. So you were correct.
I was right. Okay.
But just to let you know that, which you may not be aware, we have put in a bid for an Institute of Technology, which has at its heart transport logistics, in partnership with DP World London Gateway, Tilbury Port. We've also got 3 universities in the region on board with that. We've got Anglia Ruskin, we've got Canterbury Christchurch, and we've got University of East Anglia, who are slightly out of the region, are all involved in that, as well as a whole range of employers. So hopefully we'll be successful in that. And the whole idea of that is to begin to try and raise the profile of transport and logistics as a career route for young people. So that's one of the main objectives of that. So hopefully we'll be successful in that. So it might be worth catching up at some stage, Alistair, just to give you an update on what we've bid for and so on.
I'd love to do that. One of the vexing things of looking after 95 miles of river is you very rarely achieve perfect knowledge, and I just dropped short.
Sure. Yes.
But Rosie Arrowsmith is our marine trainee, and she's the lady who's been going through with you at Basildon, and she's just a fantastic. I mean, honestly, the skills and endeavour and commitment of these young people, I can't praise highly enough.
Yeah.
Great, encouraging, very good to hear. Final word to Sarah.
Sorry, just really quickly. Thank you, Alistair. Really fascinating presentation. I think there's loads there. Loads of opportunities to work closely with you and look at some of the agendas along net zero and many others. Just a quick question about your ambitions, sort of more on the great place to live and visit side of things.
Yeah, no, that's a really fair question, and one of the, if I presented to you about the Thames vision, we would have covered something which had port, inland freight, passengers, culture, and community as well. And that's actually a really important thing for us. We've been working with Colette Bailey around the delivery of the Estuary 2021 festival, and also working very closely with the Greater London Authority around cultural activities. It's an area where you genuinely cannot overstate the importance of the river to people's mental well-being and as a place for inspiration. Clearly it's a place for work, and it's a place where habitats are created and nurtured, but really as a place that inspires people. That's an important bit that we don't miss at the PLA. I didn't get a chance to talk about it, but again, it's something that will factor into the refreshed Thames vision, just as it was there in the original one.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Alistair. Thank you again once more for a really interesting presentation. It's almost impossible to overstate the importance of the Port of London, certainly in the local economy, but even in the world economy. It's one of the great ports of the world.
No, thank you very much for letting me join.
Good. Okay.
So we thought it would be helpful to start by setting out some of the key updates on the economy and the ongoing impacts around COVID. It's probably helpful to note that in previous updates that we provided to the board, obviously they've been quite focused on the big challenges and some of the negative impacts. But I think as we're starting to emerge from the restrictions, we can see that there are now some positives to report. So the data that's kind of on the screen, and I'll just talk through briefly, it's really more of a mixed picture these days, which I think we'll take as a positive. So nationally, for example, GDP it fell 1.5% in the first quarter of this year. And that's a much smaller fall than was expected by all economic forecasts. So, but that is seen as a positive result, particularly given the third national lockdown. Service sector output has also been increasing since January. By April, it was only around 4% below the pre-pandemic level. The unemployment rate has also fallen in the quarter, and payroll numbers have been picking up significantly in recent months, with vacancy rates also starting to recover as well. Since last September, there's been a significant increase in the rate of new company formations as well. And I think that reflects a trend that we often do see when unemployment rises and people look to alternatives. But there's also a number of other factors, including new businesses that have emerged to respond to specific changes in demands and opportunities that have come about through COVID as well. So despite these positive trends, we know that obviously economic activity and output does remain below 2019 levels. And as we've seen with the recent delay in the lifting of all restrictions, many businesses are obviously continuing to face significant challenges. So we'll continue to monitor that over the coming months. Across SELEP specifically, the impact for jobs and sectors does largely mirror national trends. And at the end of April, there were still around 200,000 furloughed jobs in our area. And that's in addition to an estimated 45,000 net job losses. So we know that certain sectors as well have been particularly affected, with both the accommodation and food and the arts, entertainment and recreation sectors both losing around 20% of jobs in their sector. Unemployment does remain higher than pre-COVID levels as well, and the more timely claimant count, it did reduce to 5.7% in May, which was down from February, but is still a lot higher than the pre-pandemic rate. And then finally, just on this slide to point out that in addition to the locally administered business grants that were made available, I think it's worth noting that over 100,000 businesses in our area had also received either a business interruption loan or a bounce back loan. And that amounts to over £4 billion worth of debt that's been taken on by those businesses. The other thing that I just wanted to sort of note today really was that we're now starting to move on to look at other more recent sources of data that help to show us trends around things such as vacancy rates and mobility. And so there's a couple of examples shown on this slide here. So firstly, the slide on the left that you can hopefully see, this looks at advertised vacancy data from our MD tool, which suggests higher recent recruitment activity, particularly in our seaside towns. And so the largest of those towns are the ones that are shown on this particular chart. We've also seen that in some other key towns, including Grays, Rochester, Dover and Hailsham, in terms of the more positive trend. That does, however, leave sort of quite a number of key employment centres that still have got advertising numbers that are pre-COVID levels. As I say, we're starting to see positive trends, and particularly in some of those maybe more tourist-focused areas. Secondly, the chart on the right shows that using Google mobility data, we can also see a strong upwards trend in terms of movement in retail and recreation footfall. Our largest towns, again, are the ones that are shown on this chart, and they're showing footfall that are close to or above February 2020 levels for the first time. And that's in stark contrast to Greater London, for example, where it remains around 30% down. So those are just kind of some examples of the data that we're seeing in terms of what we've reported previously and some of the new things that we're looking at. There's obviously a lot more detail and kind of local breakdowns and further information that can be found on our website. So we continue to update that on a monthly basis so that it can be used to inform our strategy planning going forward, and also used for information by partners as well. So that's as much as I said, wanted to say on data for now, but I'll just hand over to Helen, who has had some connection problems, but is hopefully okay.
Hello, good morning, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Oh, wonderful. Sorry, I've been having some problems with my microphone. So just moving to the strategy, firstly, just to note, since the last meeting, the final strategy has been published, as was approved at the last meeting, and a summary version and short video have now been launched and are available online. We did provide the link in your paper, so hopefully you might have had a chance to have a look. As we have sort of limited time today, we've decided to provide a few slides which outline some of the key activities that form part of our delivery plan planning. We are developing, and it's in development, a comprehensive delivery plan that sits underneath the strategy, but rather than seeking to sort of complete that, sort of finalise it and publish it imminently, we'll be keeping it under review, under development and under review, noting kind of the current policy landscape, including the LEP review, etc., which may provide opportunity to increase our kind of strategic influence in certain areas, depending on what that mandate and resources look like. So our delivery planning is structured around the 4 strategic priorities, as you would expect, but also cross-reference to the guiding principles and objectives that were agreed as part of the strategy. For today's purposes, we've set this out by activity that's already underway, areas where planning is quite well progressed, and then also areas of which might form future activities or where there are kind of gaps, some of which may not be possible until we're clear on future focus and resources, but we thought we'd just highlight some for you today. So moving to strategic priority 1, business resilience and growth. Current activities include the review of growth hubs, delivery of the COVID-19 recovery funds, as well as some key sector support fund projects such as energy and clean growth supply chain mapping, accelerating opportunities within the New Haven Enterprise Zone. In planning, we're actively engaged with BT to look at gaps in digital infrastructure and considering options for supporting greater innovation across SELEP, including looking at sectoral potential within that. In fact, yesterday you should have received, hopefully, an invite to the innovation event that BT are running for us around our strategic priorities to give us some insight into their capabilities and what we might be able to tap into within this area. Future activities around this could include building on that and looking at models for increasing innovation, and also greater activity potentially around helping businesses to adopt low carbon practices, which was a key strand of the strategy. Strategic priority 2, the UK's global gateway, obviously very and we've just heard from Alistair the importance of this area of work. Key activity here includes obviously working closely with our free ports around developing their business cases and governance arrangements. It also includes leading on some really important work around skills and employment with our major projects group. We've just received the draft report around that, and this report suggests that the 9 core projects have a construction value alone of £50 billion, will bring an additional 34 billion GVA to the area, and will generate over 60,000 jobs between now and 2024. So some really significant developments there that we can be a key part of. Moving forward, as well as further work to start with the major projects group, potentially around construction innovation, we're also planning more work with Maritime UK to look at further support for the maritime sector more widely, and seeking closer working with transport bodies and the Thames Estuary Growth Board, particularly around obviously their remits on connectivity and hydrogen development. Longer term around this priority, we'd be looking at how we can generate greater collaboration, particularly around low carbon and decarbonisation, supply chain development, and around inward investment. On strategic priority 3, are communities for the future. Following our successful Garden Communities Conference in March, work around reimagining our future communities has continued to grow, with recently convening the 7 SELEP Towns Fund offices to discuss collaboration across the area. Our Arts Council project, which is up and running, that's looking at the future of high streets. And a really successful place leadership training day that happened Tuesday this week, which was run for us by the Institute of Place Management, and was attended by 50 place leaders across the SELEP area. Happy to share more information on that to board members following the meeting. This is being followed in planning by some thematic roundtable discussions, which will be debating issues such as low carbon, levelling up, and the future of work to help us build our understanding of what our future communities need to look like, as well as building on work through the Housing and Development Group, for example, to strengthen our links with the private sector to accelerate delivery. Lastly, work around coastal includes delivery of projects to support the visitor economy, such as England's Creative Coast, for example, the growing collaboration between the Coastal Group and University 9 Group in support of business and innovation and research and development for coastal businesses, and also a deeper sort of a deeper dive on data intelligence work, really, to understand the impacts of COVID-19 on our coastal economies, but also the opportunities that may emerge from them. In terms of planning and future activities, as I said earlier, a key strand of this priority was looking at connectivity. So we are, as I said, talking to BT about issues with connectivity in coastal and rural areas. And in addition to the opportunities presented through free ports and major projects, the majority of which actually are based in our coastal areas, we're also working with the Clean Growth Group to identify the project pipeline there, and also considering how we engage, or how we should engage, with the nuclear and offshore wind sector deals. As you know, but it's important to note, this is just an example of the activity that's currently underway that underpins the delivery of our strategy. There's a lot of other work going on, obviously, to deliver across all of our projects and the wider work of the SELEP working groups, all of which we are mapping across and capturing within the delivery plan. But hopefully this just gives you a bit of a flavour of what's happening against delivering on our strategy. As we progress, of course, we need to monitor the delivery of the strategy, and we're compiling a set of direct and indirect key performance indicators for each priority. In addition to the measures, obviously, that we can impact more indirectly, such as GVA, employment skills, trade income, disposable income, we intend that we also include quite a set of direct measures, like the outcomes of our funding outputs, the Growth Hub activity, sector support fund outcomes, but also participation in some of our kind of events and some of the convening activities that we're doing. So where possible, we'll be looking at all of this in across demographics and across geographic breakdowns, so that we can help build our collective understanding of the opportunities as well as the challenges that SELEP faces in relation to inequalities and levelling up. The data set is being built sort of as we speak, really, so that we will have a full set of baseline data, which we can then update, monitor and report on to you as that data is available. So that was a very quick run through. That's all from us. I appreciate it's an update item, but we're happy to take any observations or questions.
So Helen and Sharon, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Yes, I've got several coming up, so I'm going to go in the order I see them. So Joe, Carol, Barron, and then Carol Ford. So Joe, over to you.
Thank you for the update, Helen. It looks all very positive. Just one question, really. Unless it was my eyesight, because I was trying to read quickly and I'm not great at that. You had inward investment on one of the future activities. I think it was priority 2. Inward investment isn't something as a LEP we're involved in, because obviously we've all got county organisations like for us locating Kent who deal with inward investment. Could you just explain a little how you see that going forward?
Yes, well, yes and no, I guess, Joe, is the answer to that. I mean, one of the, as part of the future activities strands of what we're looking at is, and it's an ongoing piece of work, to be honest, but it's actually looking at where there may be more that we could do. So it's not something that we're actively looking at, if you like. That was the kind of top 2 items, the things that are currently underway and planning. But it is an area that potentially, I guess, the LEP could look to do more activity around. So I suppose that's the answer. It's not an answer because you asked what we're planning to do. I think more to the point, it was just highlighting that it is an area that we could look at and might be something we want to do more in. I don't know, Sharon, if you wanted to say anything else.
I think it's something that perhaps might just almost feed into the next item a little bit. It's those potential areas where there might be an even greater role that the LEP can do to support and drive things forward following the LEP review. But as Helen said, there's a bit of an unknown around that. So I think probably we won't delve into the realms of the next item. We'll leave that for Adam.
Thank you. I will wait and see.
Thank you, Joe. I've got Carol Barron and then Carol Ford.
Yeah, thank you both very much. That was really helpful. I think the coastal growth in jobs and also the footfall is going to be inevitable with things opening up. But in terms, I mentioned it earlier, I was on a business advisory board yesterday linked to KMEP, and I was at an economic group on Tuesday. I don't think there's a sector that isn't really facing significant challenges on recruitment. And if we're talking about resilience and growth, something's got to be done, because there's no way that these sectors can even start to plan for the future if they can't recruit. So I agree with all your findings, but I think everything that I'm hearing from the business community and the public sector actually is recruitment is their biggest problem.
I think that's very true. Certainly all I'm hearing, Carol, you're absolutely right about that. Yeah. Thank you. I've got Carol Ford and then Councillor Wagland. I think then I'm going to I think I'll bring Paul. Okay, so I've got 3 more. If we can be as brief as possible. Carol, and then Leslie, and then Paul. Carol.
Yeah, thank you ever so much for the update. Appreciated. What is missing from it though is, and sort of back up what Carol's just said prior to me, is there is a huge issue currently with distribution and transport. There is something like 30,000 drivers that have not been tested. That's a lag, and there's about 45,000 missing from the actual requirement. We've actually got deliveries now that are not happening, or being late, or actually not actually being collected because there's a driver shortage. This isn't just affecting horticulture, fresh foods, which is being significantly impacted, because also there is an issue with workers with regard to harvest and picking. So I just wanted to raise this because this is a recovery and renewal, and part of your economic update, there's a whole gap missing where we've actually got a mass requirement for distribution for lorries for logistics, HGV1 and HGV2. There's all sorts of factors that are affecting that. I could go into detail about it. We've been talking about it yesterday at the Business Advisory Board, as Carol said, but also as part of the subgroup that I lead on with regard to employment task force within Kent and Medway. So there is a real issue here with regard to filling jobs.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Carol. Councillor Whiteland.
Yes, I think it's very good news that the issue over recruitment is being mentioned in just about everybody that I'm attending at the moment. So at least we know of the problem, and it's obvious that the universities and others are addressing this as we speak. But I just wonder whether anyone is at the moment focusing on those areas which have had to deal with this, albeit in different contexts, because I'm thinking, among other things, about how the Tech City Old Street roundabout effect was dealt with by a number of authorities in London who found themselves suddenly with an area that needed recruitment, and started from having none of the skills that were needed for the businesses that were expanding or coming in. And the way in which that was approached, I thought was absolutely splendid, and those sorts of examples seem to me to be worth some research, because this scenario is an oddity in terms of being a recessionary environment that isn't a traditional recession, and in fact maybe bouncing back, but also a recruitment shortage which is more consistent with a different sort of economy. And I think trying to put the jigsaw puzzle together, it is a really interesting research and academic exercise that I'd be fascinated to know more about.
Thanks, Leslie. I think, Helen, you want to respond to that?
Sorry, yes, not I suppose to all of the comment just around recruitment, just to say, I mean, obviously we didn't pull out every single example in this, but we did have on that, particularly around the business resilience and growth, around all the activities we're doing on skills and training. And just to say that particularly some of the programs that we've put out under the COVID-19 recovery funds for skills and training has focused a lot on recruitment, and recruitment in areas that has accelerated through the pandemic, trying to make sure we can transition people from where jobs have been lost to where there is higher demand. So quite a lot of that activity is focusing exactly on some of those recruitment challenges. I'm not saying it's a panacea that solves all, but just to say that that is taking place as part of the current activity.
Thank you, Helen. Paul, are you still wanting to speak because you've taken your hand down, but do you want to?
I took my hand down because what I was going to say overlapped so heavily with Carol, I didn't want to waste any time.
Okay, that's
but
good.
if I can just reaffirm what Carol said and possibly just correct her number, that Logistics UK actually said the backlog on HGV testing nationally is 45,000. And I was wondering what we can do to make certain that central government actually addresses the issue. Otherwise, there's going to be constantly a backlog.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. Thank you for raising that, Paul. I think I've got Angela, and then that's it. Leslie, is your hand still up, or? Okay.
Yeah.
Angela.
Yeah, I'd just follow up from Paul. I mean, I was wondering whether with us having so much logistics in our area, whether it might be worth SELEP writing to the government. We have got at present 100 apprentices waiting to get their tests. They finished their apprenticeship. They just need their licenses, and we can't get them booked in for licenses, and so it's having a huge impact. And so obviously we can't recruit any new ones either, because we've still got all those outstanding ones. So I don't know whether there's anything, whether it's worth writing, but it was just a suggestion. I don't know whether it will make any difference.
Happy to consider a letter, Angela, if you'd like to work with the Secretariat on that. Happy to do that.
Okay, will do.
Carol Fort.
Yeah, I just want to come back, just basically say that we had via DWP in Kent and Medway an offer that if we could get companies that have got numbers that they need testing for HGV1 and HGV2, DWP would be able to get the courses put on within 2 to 3 weeks. That was correct, Paul, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, training, of course. So,
yeah, training for HGV1 and HGV2. Yeah. So.
But the issue isn't the training. The issue is getting the test at the end.
Yeah.
Which is a license to practice. You can't go out in an HGV without passing your test. And the problem we've got is getting the tests done, not the training.
Okay.
Very happy to consider a letter if people feel that would be helpful. Great.
Please.
Okay, absolutely. Let's, in that case, thank you very much, Helen and Sharon. We'll move on to the next item, which is the LEP review update. As you know, when I last reported on this, there was a working at the LEP network, and the officials in the Cities and Local Growth Unit were going to work very closely together to produce a series of recommendations that would go to ministers by the summer recess, i.e. by mid to end of July, with a view to ministers making their decisions based on those recommendations in September, October, for implementation of any changes by the 1st of April 2022. What has happened is that we had been relying on the officials from the Cities and Local Growth Unit to be producing papers on which we would comment for a range of reasons, notably staff shortages within the Cities and Local Growth Unit team, and a significant increase on their workload, principally to do with the rolling out of the Levelling Up Fund. They've sort of ground to a halt in terms of the production of the papers from their side. So what has been agreed to help them out is that the LEP network working groups would take the initiative for producing papers based on questions that would be supplied by the Cities and Local Growth Unit team. Those questions, even those questions have been somewhat slow, and as a result, things are not going as fast as we would like. And in fact, on the working group that I lead, which is on funding and implementation, we've not received any questions. But nevertheless, we have been working hard. So we thought we'd produce a paper anyway in the absence of questions. So there has been some work done on the form and function, on geography, and on accountabilities, which appear to be moving in the right direction. But other things are going slow. And as a result, there has to be, in my view, some question as to whether or not the recommendations will be delivered on time before the end of the current parliamentary session, indeed whether ministers will therefore be in a position to make their decisions in September. So what does that mean for us? I think what it means for us, and we'll come on to this with the succession planning, I think it means that we need to, I think, just pause and wait to see what comes out. And I think by October, we should know much more than we do now. I'm very confident of that. Secondly, we will have to make decisions on the budgeting for financial year 22-23, and what that means for the shape of the Secretariat and the services the Secretariat will be offering in financial year 22-23, and we'll probably need to make those decisions probably at the October board, and we may not have perfect information. at that time to do that. So it's putting us in a little bit of a difficulty in terms of the slowness, but that will be the case for all LEPs across the piece. Adam, do you want to add anything to what I've said, or Suzanne? Suzanne Bennett is also working on a working group. I think you're on accountabilities, Suzanne, and that you have managed to produce your paper, which is a good one. So I mean, Adam and Suzanne, I don't know if you've got anything to add to what I've just said.
So yeah, I was actually at the working group meeting this morning, so apologies for joining this meeting late. We have done some work that will be submitted in to officials shortly, but we don't have any assurance around when we'll get a response from that submission. So yeah, I share the chair's worries about the time that this is taking, and that it seems to be very unlikely that we'll have the clarity that we need by the time that Parliament rises at recess.
Thank you, Suzanne. Adam, you've got any other further observations?
Nothing really to add, Chris. I guess that there are lots of things we could say about it, and our preferences on the direction of travel, etc. Perhaps we'd be better placed to have that conversation in October. I mean, just to provide somewhat of a context. We've got a team away day next week where I'm trying to be proactive and in suggesting to the team what some of those range of services that we might be able to provide next year might be, so we can be at least front-footed when government come to us in October. You know, we want to have some semblance of an idea as to what we do, and obviously we've got some fabulous things to build on. So that's a conversation that's that we're going to have across the team, and I've got plenty of ideas as to what we'll do. And indeed, I know that lots of our colleague LEPs have already started planning for next year. Perhaps they anticipate fewer changes than we do, but certainly big conversation on this in October is I think the place.
Yeah. So I'm happy to take any questions, but I have to give you a caveat that there isn't going to be an awful lot that we can say given the slowness. I've got Joe, Carol, and then Ron. So Joe, and that's Carol Barron, because there are two Carols obviously. So Carol Barron, Joe, Carol Barron, and then Ron. Councillor Woodley.
Yeah, it was to Adam really. Adam, you said that you're having a team away day to have a look at the potential, or strategy session, whatever it was, to have a look at potential activities that you could get involved in. Do you think this is something that would be quite useful at some point to have board engagement on, seeing as we're directors of the organisation, for us to help shape and look at potential future activities for the organisation we're directors of?
Absolutely. I think it's my job to sort of come up with the first pass, if you like, and then give you something to work with for sure. I think a lot of the conversation in October will be sort of on an operational basis and sort of how we're constrained or otherwise by what we think the budget settlement will be for us. But no, you can rest assured, Joe, that we'll fully engage the board in it for sure.
Thank you, Joe. I've got Carol Barron and then Councillor Woodley.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge what must be a really challenging time for the Secretariat. Yeah. I mean, all of this uncertainty, and they're all continuing to work extremely hard, and it must be really difficult because there's enough challenges around COVID and lockdown, and this on top of it. So just wanted to acknowledge that, and our thanks.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. You're absolutely right. It is a difficult time for them, and I think they're doing a fantastic job in trying circumstances, and I think we should all acknowledge that. And I do think, and one of the things that I do emphasise in dealings with officials is that is the level of the uncertainty and the difficulty that causes, Carol, and keep on trying to impress upon them the real need to have this review done and dusted as quickly as possible, because we've already seen the attrition that has taken place in the team, and it's a very difficult situation for them whilst this uncertainty persists. So just to note, thank you for your comments, and I certainly endorse what you say, and don't think that we're not making exactly those points to ministers and to officials at every opportunity. I've got Ron and then Ron Woody and then Councillor Goff.
Just Chair, I think you've said it all and Carol said it all. I think the government need to realise the impact on people's security, job security and everything else that goes with it. And so I'll leave it there because I think you've had enough comment on it. But I'd like to give our officers my full support.
Thank you, Ron.
Because the job that they do is really tremendous. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. That's much appreciated. I'm sure they appreciate your words. Councillor Goff.
Thank you, Chairman, and absolutely endorse what Ron just said. My question was whether we're seeing any greater clarity at the moment on the scale issue, if you like, of LEPs, because we've always, in the conversations we've had in the past, the sense has been we would be less likely to be affected by a general drive towards consolidation, if you like, than elsewhere, given that we're one of the largest LEPs.
Yes.
I just wondered if any element of that was taking greater shape.
I think, I mean, I hesitate to say very much, Roger, because nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. But there have been sort of first drafts of the paper on geography, which is what you're referring to.
Yes.
And this is an itch that ministers love to scratch, to use a rather crude analogy. But any opportunity to look at geography, they love to do it. What I can say is that what I had feared was that HM Treasury would take a sort of major hand in this and look for economies of scale and therefore consolidation of LEPs, and there is no indication that is happening. So there's no one is suggesting that there should. There's clearly been some discussion about pan-regional cooperation in the way that the Capitalist South has been. We've been doing Capitalist South or the Midlands Engine or the Northern Powerhouse, etc. Those regional cooperations, where appropriate, are being encouraged, and we're also, obviously on my side, we're looking for funding for that. But as you can imagine, but I think there are two particular themes that I would say are becoming clear. The first is that you'll remember that, and certainly Graham Peters will remember that we had a real drive to eliminate areas of overlap where we overlapped with other LEPs. And all of us went through a number of agonies because there were a number of overlaps all over the country. And we did that when we eliminated the overlap. So where we had an overlap in East Sussex around Lewes principally, that was eliminated, and we took over from Coastal Capital all responsibility for LEP activities in the Lewes area. And similarly, in the north part of the region, around Stansted, again, we eliminated the overlap there. So we did exactly what we were supposed to do. Sadly, a couple of LEPs, no, three LEPs, three areas did not do that. And they are in the West Midlands, and all of them are in the West Midlands, and for reasons that I cannot understand. Those and so the ministers are going to come back pretty strongly and say those overlaps must be eliminated. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that, as all of us know, there is a further white paper promised on devolution and possible further mayor combined authorities. And there is again a desire on behalf of ministers and possibly officials, and certainly officials I think as well, is that the LEP footprints and the footprints of the MCAs should be congruent or should be the same. But as all of us know, that paper on that further paper on devolution has been promised for some time, and none of us, I don't think, see it's going to come out any day soon. So this question of geography, I hope will be settled as far as LEPs are concerned well before the white paper comes out. So those are the comments I would make. So I'm not anticipating that there will be any change in the SELEP geography, and I'm not, and in particular, the way that we operate around our federated model, which I think is critical to maintaining our local identity and knowledge. As you all know, I've been a huge believer in that, and was really focused last time round that we would preserve the federated model. It works for us. It's been working well for us for the last 11 years, and I want to try and preserve that if I can. So those are the comments I would make on geography.
Thank you very much, Chair. Endorse that, including your comments on ministers and maps.
Yes, yes. Councillor Coxall.
Yes, yeah, I took this review as not just it's very negative here, and it's a view of what's going to happen, and we're very worried. But it's an opportunity as well. There's always an opportunity here to actually show how we can shape what you've just discussed, Chris. There is that, and how that works well with the federated model, and how other wet LEPs can, and how we can actually shape something. So in the away day next week, maybe Adam will actually show how we can actually shape the review itself and the results of the review. Yep. It's also it's not just about the breaking up and the government wants to look at it. I think that it's taking best practice, and if we sell what we've been doing, and then we reshape and we see the LEPs coming out of that, and it'd be nice to have her on a away day. If you're away day next week, is to work that and the results could come back in more what we want. Yep. It's not just it's negative all the time. It's got to be how the review should be shaped, and we should be submitting in something that shapes that.
Mark, you're absolutely right, and I do think actually the problems that the CLG unit have been facing actually present us, the LEP network, and indeed Suzanne and myself, who are on these working parties, with a wonderful opportunity to actually take the initiative. And I said rather tongue-in-cheek to Roger that there were a number of asks that we were putting into our paper around funding, for example, for various elements. I mean, one of the things that we are pushing for in our paper on funding, for example, which the working group I chair, is multi-year funding. You know, multi-year funding for LEPs would be fantastic. I mean, it's the nirvana, as those of you who know public service well, it's the nirvana of public service to get multi-year funding, and it's the anathema to Treasury to grant it. But so there's always a battle between those who want multi-year funding and Treasury trying to bat it off. But nevertheless, we have that opportunity, and we will be taking it. And there's a number of other areas. Mark, you're absolutely right. And certainly I've been involving Adam on the funding paper. So he's had his opportunity to put and he was very helpful in giving input, which will be reflected in our funding paper as and when it gets drafted. So you're absolutely right. We should be playing initiative, and we are taking it. Carol, forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just really wanted to just support what Mark was saying about taking initiative, but also what Joe said with regard to this away day in terms of coming up with different ideas. I think that there's enough newbies on this board to actually be able to take part and contribute within a sort of session like that in terms of ideas and coming up with different ways of looking at it, for example, in terms of actually generating some of the opportunities that I think that this review presents. So I'm actually quite strongly in favour of actually the board getting involved in some way, shape or form in a sort of round robin type ideas generation of away day or whatever.
Yeah, Carol, you're absolutely right. We'll look into we should take that in as a matter of urgency, actually, because we've got until the end of July to shape these recommendations. Let's get the input from the board. I agree with you. So I'll ask Adam to look into how we do that. Councillor Woodley.
Yeah, just quickly, Chris, just to say, I understand what Mark's trying to say there, but we do need to have a solid foundation to change and adapt. What we haven't got yet is that foundation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I still think we should get the views of this board, which I think will be really, really helpful, and then we can decide how best to feed that into the process. If that's agreed. Okay, I think that's all on that topic. Thank you very much for your contributions. So let's move forward to succession planning succession planning. As I said, I think we do have still 9 months to go before we need to make a change at chair level, we have this element of uncertainty, which I think will we'll know more clearly in October. So I think, from my side, I think the best thing to do is to defer decision making around the succession process until October, and then come up with a plan that is clearly represents the need for transparency and openness in the chair succession process, and come back to you with a proposal at that time with the benefit of the information that we should have by then. I would just in passing say that, as you can imagine, we're not the only LEP out of the 38 that has this chair succession issue at this time. There are 5 other LEPs that either have just appointed a chair during the period of uncertainty or out in the market looking for a chair. And certainly all the feedback I've had from those 5 LEPs is that they've either been able to, notwithstanding the uncertainty, they've been able to appoint excellent candidates, or that they have had excellent responses if they haven't actually got to the point of making the selection process. So what I would propose to you, if you agree, is that we park the succession process planning until October, and then come back to you in October with a worked out process that does represent transparency and openness, as you would hope, and deal with it at that time. Clearly, it is something that I should not be involved with, other than to satisfy myself that the process is in accordance with the assurance frameworks, etc. But so that will be all part of the recommendation that we make in October. Do people agree with that? If people are happy with that, then I think that's what we should do. So that's, can I just have a vote, show of hands, just to defer? It's always easier to defer a decision than make one. Okay, I think that's approved. Thank you. So we'll come back in October with a process then. And secondly, I think, Suzanne, you were going to talk to us about the board effectiveness review.
Yes, just very briefly, Select Board know that we do want to run a survey to gather the board members' opinions on how we function and how the board works together. As Carol mentioned, we've got some new, although over a year now for most members on the board, so it seems like an opportune time to take that temperature test, and that would also be useful information that we can feed into the process, looking at what the new LEP might look like and how we might want to construct the board in future. It will be very light touch. I know people are very busy and I don't want to put more on the to-do list. So it will be an online survey, a dozen questions, really shouldn't take too much of your time, and we'll be rolling that out shortly.
Thank you. Any questions for Suzanne on that? Claire Lewis, is your hand was up, or okay? So I think you've got a green light there, Suzanne. Adam, I think you wanted to make one point on the previous.
Yeah, no, just for the record, really, just to be really clear that the paper as written, the original idea for it was mine and not Sarah's. So, you know, I put it forward on the basis of promoting continuity during a turbulent period, really. But I just wanted to be clear with everybody that, you know, it stemmed from me.
That's fine. Thank you, Adam, for that. I'm sure Sarah will appreciate that comment. Good. Okay. In that case, let's move on. I think we've got the next item is the Growth Hub update. Joe Simmons. Oh, sorry, Joe James. Did you want to make a Did you want to make a point?
If I could, before we start the update, I've been asked by the legal representative on chat if I could just be a little clearer on my interest on this item. So, just for the record, just to say that the Kent Invicta Chamber currently delivers the Growth Hub across Kent and Medway.
Yeah, that's thank you for that, and a great job you do. So, thank you for that, Joe James, and now we'll turn over to Joe Simmons for the update.
Thank you, Chris. I'm just going to share my screen with a couple of slides and give you a 2-minute update before we go into discussion. So I presented to you back in December on our proposals to evolve the SELEP Growth Hub service, largely driven by the need to become stronger and more flexible and responsive in a national context. So since then, we've commissioned an appraisal of our Growth Hub delivery model. This has recently concluded in the form of a report, which is contained in today's board pack. And what we are proposing to do is use this report to develop options and recommendations for board around how to evolve the Growth Hub service. But as we can all appreciate, the timeline for this has been delayed because this piece of work will need to be informed by the LEP review and where the Growth Hub service sits in the LEPs going forward. And also, because of the LEP review, the delayed National Business Support Reform Plan, which also needs to feed into this piece of work. The piece of work, just to note, will also draw on the National Growth Hub evaluation, which is taking place at the moment, and our own annual evaluation, which has just concluded this month. So at this time, we anticipate being able to bring you proposals for decision later in the year, along the timescales we've heard earlier for the LEP review. And in the meantime, today, we'd like to invite discussion and feedback on the findings of the delivery model report. In parallel with this, we will be conducting an online survey for federated area board members to also feedback so that we can collate all of these views and build those into our proposals for recommendations. So in essence, the report contains 14 findings and 7 recommendations. Excuse me, I just need to move the presentation forward. Can you see the presentation on the screen?
Yes, all very clear, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So these are the findings. They're headlined on the screen here. They don't contain any real surprises. They've been drawn from multiple conversations and workshop sessions with our Growth Hub delivery partners. And I would stress that they're underpinned throughout the report by the recognition that the service performs very well indeed. Targets are met, the hub and spoke model enables the local delivery that we all know is vital, relationships are strong, and there are high levels of customer satisfaction. So in essence, to me, these findings show that there is scope to strengthen our service that already performs well, and the scope lies around leadership, strategic planning and commissioning of outcomes, the better utilisation of data and the resources that we already have at our disposal. What these findings then go on to talk about in the report is recommendations, of which there are 7, and these are headlined here. And these suggest a package of measures in which SELEP Limited takes on a more authoritative leadership role for the Growth Hub service, and this should sit against an overarching new Growth Hub strategy that would utilise our data, intelligence and insight in a much better way. This should be complemented by more aligned and simplified governance around the Growth Hub service. They talk about a new strategic lead and a permanent data officer post to facilitate these ambitions, alongside the development and implementation of an operational playbook, which would set out a consistent and transparent core offer. And this in turn would help with the sharing of best practice and resources, and also inform the deployment of core funding in the future. That's all really that I had to say, Chair. I didn't want to go through line by line the contents of the report, and would rather answer any questions that anyone might have, and then open up the floor for discussion and feedback.
Thanks very much indeed, Joe. There are a couple of questions. I've got Carol Ford and then David Shepherd. So Carol, over to you and then to David.
Thank you ever so much.
And Winter, yes. So there's 3 of you. And I think we can try and keep it very snappy because we're very short of time.
Yeah, basically the commercial public limited report, as I've read it and gone through it, I don't accept it in its current form, because it's obviously been created, as Joe Simmons quite rightly just said, without the knowledge of the LEP review, nor the outcome of the government's wider business support review, but also the survey of the federated board, which was agreed by the LEP in December, at our meeting in December. Joe James raised a point and I backed up the point and further elaborated on the point with regard to the substantive discussion that we had on the 11th of December. The video meeting is available, and I've checked the video meeting just to make sure that I did say what I thought I said, which was that we actually requested the federated board's consultation into the review to produce this first report, so that we could actually then present back to so it could then be put as part of this report. And it's not in the report, it's actually item 3. And I'm actually quite taken aback that a point that was actually agreed by you, Chris, and by Joe, that would be included, which was the inclusion of the federated boards for this purpose in terms of the consultation. And I understand that from reading through it, there was actually 16 people took part. I think 5 of them were actually within the SELEP environment. It's really important for the growth hubs and for the future of the growth hubs that the federated boards are included, and they should be included now, not at a later stage.
Thank you, Carol. Joe, I don't know if you want to respond to Carol, but if that was agreed, then clearly that should happen. Joe, do you want to make an observation?
Yes, happy to respond, and thank you, Carol, for raising those points. I probably would have to go back and listen to exactly what was said, but I think from my perspective, the report undertaken by Commercially Public was an independent appraisal of what they could see based on information provided by individuals directly involved in the delivery of the service, and then that goes into the mix with the survey and the business support reform plan, the LEP review, two bits for SELEP then to be able to generate recommendations for change to evolve the Growth Hub service. That's what we had been anticipating to have been done by now, last December, but because the LEP review then kicked in March, it's definitely slowed that piece of work down because because we can't really do that without the findings of the LEP review and that coming to some sort of clarity. So the report as it stands is a standalone independent report, which now needs to feed into the mix with those discussions, the LEP review and the further information on the business support reform plan and the federated area boards as well. But I do apologise if that hasn't played out.
That's not what we agreed, Joe. At the meeting, it's that relevant comments were made at 2 hours 17 minutes and 2 hours 22 minutes on the video in terms of the meeting minutes. And as far as I'm concerned, the reason that I was making the point was that it actually needed the federated board's input in terms of the growth hubs, because the growth hubs actually operate at a local level. The way the local level works is different within Kent and Medway, it's different within Essex, and it's really important if you're doing a piece of research, which is what these consultants are doing in the first instance, is the research piece, is that all bits are taken into consideration, and this hasn't been done, and that was agreed by you and by Chris at that meeting.
It should be done. So Carol, we will make sure that that is rectified.
Thank you.
It will be done. Thank you for that. I've got Paul Winter and then David Shepherd.
Yes, very quickly, Chair. I just want to make certain that I've interpreted what Joe has said correctly, and particularly referring to Appendix A, which is time bound. My understanding is that the board is not being requested to approve anything today. That
is correct, Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, good. And therefore, item 2 and 3. On the appendix now could be merged so that the board considers both items at presumably the next meeting.
Yes, I think that can be done.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. David.
I just wanted to reinforce really that it was a nice piece of work. I was involved with the analysis, and absolutely, it should be put to one side to await the information coming from other sources. I think from our perspective as the Growth Hub, there are one or two small areas that need a discussion before a detailed debate at a forum like this. So I think that's just reinforcing the point that this is a good informative document. It will help inform us in terms of decisions that have to be made, and that we will get the opportunity to have that discussion around the details before we put it to a forum like this where we have a big debate about it. So
I think those points are well made, David. Thank you very much for that. Okay, if there's nothing further, I will move on then to the next item, which is Freeport East. And I think that Adam is going to take us through this.
Yes, thanks, Chris. That one's with me, and I'll try and keep it fairly brief. So Freeport East, as the other freeports in the country, not least the Thames Freeport, is becoming established. The team behind Freeport East, the secretariat is East Suffolk District Council. They pull in together the board. The recommendation from them is that they have a single LEP appointee to that board. So the proposal in the paper, as I'm sure everybody's aware, is that we undertake that jointly with New Anglia LEP. And given the nature of the conversations that we sort of contribute to those board meetings on an executive basis, so what we put in for decision is that we agree that the chief executive of the New Anglia LEP is indeed the LEP appointee to the board, that I'm his alternate. And what we would seek to do, obviously, is engage out with we would be committed to engaging our board through me, reporting to the board on a regular basis, and indeed ahead of those Freeport meetings, on any decisions, of material interest to us, and really make sure that we connect the board, to the maximum possible extent. The whole detail is in the paper. I think it's a really good example of joint working across two LEPs. We've worked really closely with New Anglia on this, and indeed both LEPs have played an important role in supporting conversations across the early conversations ahead of the submission of the Freeport proposal, and this just represents a continuation of that, really. So I won't go into all of the detail of the paper. I'm sure board directors are well familiar with it, but that's the recommendation.
I've got Angela and then Perry wanting to make some comments. So Angela, over to you. Thank you, Adam.
I don't know what influence we've got over the board or the appointees on the board, but I'd just like to make a suggestion. I don't know how realistic it is, but there's a one higher education appointee on it. And one of the things that would make real sense to me is if that was somebody from one of the universities that was linked to the Institute of Technology, which is also focused on transport and logistics, possibly the University of East Anglia, because they're in both LEPs. It's only a suggestion. I don't know what influence we have over it, if any.
I could certainly put it their way, Angela. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Perry.
Thanks, Chris. I'm fine with the paper, Adam. The one question it does prompt, though, is the involvement of the SELEP in Freeport Thames. Freeport Thames is moving at pace and is working on the outline business case. And I think the SELEP should be on that board, as was originally anticipated. So I would certainly like to sort of get some form of endorsement from this board for you to go to the SELEP on behalf of SELEP to Freeport Thames and push forward for membership of SELEP on that board as well as this one, because of the importance of the Freeport Thames and SELEP's involvement in that. So I think there was just a bit of a gap here as to what's happening with that board as opposed to Freeport East.
Thank you, Perry. That's a very important point. I think the legislation setting up Freeports does make a recommendation that LEPs should be represented on the Freeport boards. So before I ask Adam to comment on that, I just want to hear, I think Councillor Coxall's also got a point to make. Mark.
Yeah, I don't want to disagree with Perry publicly so much, but I will. There's a different structure in the Freeport Thames Freeport model to it's private sector led more than led by the like you just heard, the local authority. So the local authority has asked this SELEP. We are, as the major local authority for that one, rely more. The board is being formulated. I don't know the business case at the moment. So yeah, we could be. I do see the reasons that we say a SELEP there, but it's got a different model slightly of that, and it's actually run by the three businesses inside there who are leading this through that, and it's the board, I think, is going to be still an ongoing case, and I'm sure we can take that back and ask the question. But I don't know if that's right. It's even discussions about whether the authority sits on the board and how we sit on the board is still ongoing.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark. Adam, do you want to comment? Sam, thank you as well.
I mean, obviously, if board members are keen for us to write, then we'll do that. I think the key point in terms of SELEP's representation is what we can bring, and I think looking forward, we'll have a role around economic intelligence, and certainly on a regional level. And I certainly think that is something that we could uniquely bring to discussions, either with the Thames Freeport or indeed with Freeport East. So conversations I'm sure to be had, but I certainly will take the board's direction on it. And
I think it's reasonably clear what the board's direction is in relation to the Thames Freeport. I mean, the legislation does recommend that LEPs be on the boards of Freeports in that area. So I think if that recommendation isn't going to be accepted, I think this board will need to understand the reasons why the recommendation isn't being followed. James.
I just wanted to pick up on Angela's comment about the University of East Anglia.
Yes.
I think it's a really good recommendation there, which Adam said he was going to follow up. But just to reiterate that we do have expertise in transport and logistics within our own LEP area. I know from Kent, we've got Kent and Greenwich have expertise in that area. So just wanted to put that on the table.
Thank you, Jo. Okay, just to sum up then, I need an approval from this board to our representation in the manner that Adam described on the board of Freeport East. Are people happy with that? Can I just see show of hands? Thank you. So that's as alternating with Chris Starkey, who's the CEO of New Anglia LEP. And as far as the Thames Freeport is concerned, I think this board is making an inquiry as to the representation on the board of the Thames Freeport, noting that the legislation setting Freeports up does recommend that LEPs be represented. So we need to understand why the Thames Freeport, if they're minded not to follow that recommendation, I think we need to understand the reasons for why they're not doing it. Is that everyone happy with that? Good. Okay, thank you. Let's move on then to the sector support fund update. Adam.
Thanks, Chris. Me again. So just very quickly, I'm very conscious that it's 2 minutes past 12. 2 items here. So we've got no new sector support fund bids to approve or otherwise this morning, but just 2 updates. A change request for the accelerating opportunities within the New Haven Enterprise Zone project. So this is around a project that seeks to refine the Avis Way improvement plan and test and assess options for creating an industrial business improvement district within the enterprise zone. A lot of those consultations have been delayed because, all related to COVID. So there is a very reasonable request to push the project back to complete in September 2021. Which having looked at it and obviously being involved in conversations around New Haven and the enterprise zone, I would fully support myself. So before we move into the second item, Chris,
just on that, Graham, did you have I think Graham's got his hand up. Graham Peters.
Only just to say thank you very much indeed, Adam. Please can I commend this extension to the board? It's a very important project to New Haven, and the delays are purely COVID related.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you. Okay, Adam.
Yeah, so that was it on that one before we move to the second bit. So for board members, if you want to move to the recommendation on that one.
Are you happy happy with that recommendation? Hands. Okay, I think you got that, Adam.
Thank you. So just the second element of the sector support fund update is really to give the board the opportunity to hear a little bit more on the Accelerating Climate-Based Solutions project. So this is the project that we approved last time around in March, focus on carbon sequestration. Andy Arnold from East Sussex County Council has very kindly made himself available to us, and he's here now. Thank you, Andy. Just to give us a few words of update on the project, because we felt that there were a few questions about it. People wanted to get better grips with what it was. And I think just as we come towards the end of the meeting, I think a few minutes on this project would be really beneficial.
Okay, Adam, thank you. Andy, welcome. If you've got a few minutes just to update us.
Great, thank you very much, Chair, and very much grateful to the board both for this opportunity. I appreciate it is very near the end of your meeting, but also more importantly for the funding for this project. So my name is Andy Arnold. I work for East Sussex County Council. I'm the Environment Team Manager. I just want to very briefly run through the context for the project, summarise the key deliverables, outline some of the main benefits and challenges, just to really emphasise at the outset that although the County Council holds the contract with SELEP for this project, it is very much a partnership project. So we have a pan-LEP steering group with representatives from both the private, public and also the academic sectors. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the project is really about contributing to addressing climate change, really by reducing carbon emissions through offsetting and keeping more of the money that gets spent on offsetting within the region. And on the basis of that, trying to build a credible regional market for both buyers and sellers of carbon offsets. So what I mean by offsetting is where someone pays for a scheme that reduces carbon emissions that are unavoidable. So for example, say an airline, in order to offset their emissions, may pay, for example, for say the construction of a wind farm or to plant trees. The offsetting in this project is all about land management. So it's not about wind farms, for example. So there are different ways to manage land, and the ways that that land can be managed can increase how much carbon can be stored. So for example, in soils and in vegetation such as trees. So the buyers in this market are those who want to pay to offset their carbon emissions, for example, airlines. They're the demand side. And then there's the sellers on the supply side are those who own or manage the land and have the ability to change how they manage that land in order to capture more carbon than they already are. There are already lots of carbon markets that exist globally and regionally. For example, the EU's emissions trading scheme, which covers a number of regulated industries in the EU and so on. And there's a number of carbon codes that exist to try and regulate it, set standards through the verification and so on through third parties. So for example, in the UK, we have two main carbon codes to do with vegetation. One is the Woodland Code and one is the Peatland Code, which have been in existence for a little while. They set independent quality assurance standards and are backed by the government. So a lot of the architecture of carbon offsets in land management is already in place, but it's quite fragmented and it's complicated for people to access either from the demand side or the supply side. So there's some real barriers, and this project is trying to address some of those barriers. At the moment, the size of the voluntary market, and that's what we're looking at, the voluntary rather than the regulated market, is really quite small. Globally, it's about $400 million, and the price of carbon within the market is really low. It's about £2 to £3 per tonne. So it really doesn't drive investment in this sector yet, but it is likely to grow very quickly. There's probably not a day that goes past without some kind of announcement from some large blue chip company or a nation about getting commitments to net zero. Whether that's Microsoft, for example, say committing to remove all their carbon since they were set up in 1975, to airlines like EasyJet making major announcements about carbon offset schemes. And last year, Mark Carney set up a new private sector task force on scaling voluntary carbon markets with the likes of Unilever, Shell, and BlackRock. And what they're trying to do is really boost consumer confidence that real emission reductions will be achieved through investing in land management. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of the headlines of what the project will deliver, it is a 12-month project. The budget is about £200,000. We have expertise from across the region to help us to focus on what we need to achieve. What we're looking to do is make sure that the benefits are spread well and geographically across the area so they're equitable in each of the LEP board areas. So what we're looking to do is focus on one geographic area as a kind of district or borough scale within each of the 4 areas. We will look to assess the opportunities and barriers to offsetting in each of those areas. So for example, could you plant more trees? If so, where and what would be that volume and who might be able to do that? That will be through a series of desktop and on-site surveys. We'll then evaluate the demand for local offsetting. In other words, who's going to pay for doing the planting, for example. So we're looking to engage with local authorities who mostly have made climate commitments so far, as well as a range of businesses to understand what they would be willing to pay and what quality assurance standards they would need in place in order to cover any investments as a demand side. On the supply side, which is probably the most complicated part of the equation, we need to evaluate the potential supply of local offsets. So we're talking to the National Farmers Union, the CLA, and environmental NGOs, the likes of RSPB and so on, to see what they can offer into the market and at what price to people who wish to pay for it. So we'll develop some resources to try and address some of the key challenges. So for example, template legal agreements, training requirements so that people understand how to get into the market and what that means for them. And do that through some demonstration projects. So one in each of the federated board areas. And finally, on the basis of what we learn, we'll look to try and develop some kind of hub as a platform to try and get the supply and demand together, although that will probably be early days at the end of the project. Next slide, please. So the key benefits, as I say, what we're really trying to do is drive carbon emission reductions through offsetting and keep the money that's invested in that in the region. And finally, really on the back of that, to build a credible regional market for offsetting. So there are a range of co-benefits from doing that. It enables the farming land management community to diversify their income streams, deliver a range of other co-benefits, so improves biodiversity, reducing runoff, flood risk, and so on, and also to try and stack some of these benefits. So we have, through the Environment Bill that's making its way through Parliament, we have the requirement, for example, for biodiversity net gain from new developments. So we'll be able to start to build, say, the income from biodiversity net gain together with carbon offsetting and so on, to create a real investment opportunity for those who've got that land to be able to do that in. Next slide, please. So just finally on the key challenges, there's some really significant challenges in this area. And these are generic, so they're not just related to this project. So firstly, the confidence in the science. There's lots of uncertainty outside of planting trees or looking after peatland as to what you can actually sequester in land management and for how long. So there's some real uncertainty. We need to try and start to address some of that to help to build some confidence in the market. There's also the question about the cost. It's too low at the moment in carbon for people to really invest in it. So we need to start to stack benefits. So I was talking about biodiversity net gain. We need to be able to start to build a business case for people to want to sell into the market and for people to want to buy into that. There's a real reputational risk here as well. With the uncertainty in the science, landowners that we've been talking to are really concerned about seen to be profiting from an emerging market that actually lacks credibility at the moment because of the issues with this science. And there's some real problems about competing drivers. So at the moment, we have the likes, for example, of Morrison's and Waitrose, who are asking the farmers in their supply chain to become carbon neutral. What that means is actually there may be few farmers who have spare capacity to capture carbon on their own land after they've offset their own emissions. In addition, we're not quite sure what the government's replacement system for the EU's farming subsidies are going to be. So it may be that government wants to use public money to pay for public goods. They may end up paying farmers and landowners to offset on their own land, which means, again, they won't have any spare capacity to sell in the market. So potentially some real constraints on the supply side, which is probably the biggest barrier that we've got with this project. Thank you. I hope it's been useful. I'll be more than happy to take any questions.
Andy, thank you very much. Are there any questions or observations for Andy in this very important area? I think you can take that as an endorsement or approval, Andy, of what you've been saying. So thank you very much for coming, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, we've come to the AOB section. Has anyone got any other business? I've not been informed of any. Adam, have you got any? No? Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And we'll obviously keep in contact, particularly your thoughts on the contributions you can make to that review are very well received here, and Adam and the team will be working out how best to incorporate those. But thank you very much for those. I think clearly those are urgent because the recommendations will have to go in if they keep the timetable before the summer recess. So we'll get cracking on that. Otherwise, thank you very much and have a good summer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Bye, everyone. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.